This is another iRaw podcast.
Hello, I'm Amelia Lease, and welcome to Season 4 of Think Like a Vegan, a companion podcast to my book entitled Think Like a Vegan, which is also available in paperback and audiobook. Some people change the world through grand gestures. Others, like Alan Watson Featherstone, do it one tree at a time, patiently, persistently, restoring the Earth's broken harmonies. In this episode, I have the great privilege of spending time with Alan, a quiet visionary whose work has helped rewild Scotland's landscapes for over 4 decades. Whether you're deeply familiar with his legacy with Trees for Life or just beginning to explore rewilding, this conversation feels like walking through an ancient forest, full of wisdom, unexpected turns, and moments of profound clarity. We'll talk about why ecological restoration isn't just about saving nature, but about healing our relationship with it, reimagining our relationship with it. And towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about rewilding itself. I'll never forget the moment my husband Roger and I first heard Alan speak at Dundragon in the Scottish Highlands. As he described decades of tending to the Caledonian forest, something shifted in us. At the end of the talk, Roger turned to me and said simply, "Why don't we do something like that?" That question became our own beginning. And if you've ever felt the pull to mend what's broken in the land or in our connection to it, I think you'll find something just as stirring here. Before we hear from Alan, here's a bit of background about him. Alan founded the award-winning charity Trees for Life back in 1986 and was its chair for about 30 years. He's a writer, nature photographer, ecologist, public speaker, and a tremendous source of knowledge and experience. From my personal experience, spending time with him in forests or nature is both super fun and a lesson in whatever might come along as you're walking, whether it's trees, history, mosses, lichen, birds, and other animals. His work has been recognized with many awards, and he's appeared in books, television programs, and radio. Welcome, Alan. It's so great to have you here. I am absolutely delighted that we found some time for you to be with us because I'm a big fan of yours, as you know.
Well, thanks, Emmy. It's great to have this opportunity to do this podcast with you. And hi to everybody out there who's listening to this. So my life's work has been about restoring the Caledonian forest in the Highlands of Scotland. And I'm a native Scot. I was born in 1954, grew up in Scotland, but in my early 20s, I had an opportunity to travel throughout a lot of the world, particularly North and South America, and subsequently to all other continents, except for Antarctica. And in a lot of those journeys, I spent time out in wild nature, in forests, in mountain areas, beautiful places. I went to the Galapagos Islands, and I felt really touched by the presence of wild nature, of healthy, intact ecosystems, and many of the wonderful species that we share our planet with. I came back to live in Scotland in 1978 when I joined the Findhorn community on the Moray coast, about 25 miles east of Inverness, a community founded in 1962 based on the premise that nature has intelligence, purpose, and spirit, and that if we take time to communicate with nature, we can learn to work cooperatively with nature and produce remarkable results. So Findhorn became famous in the 60s for growing 40-pound cabbages out of basically sand dunes. And that attracted me here because I felt this connection with nature myself. But coming back to live in Scotland after several years abroad was very painful in some ways because I saw how depleted Scotland was in terms of its nature. Having visited healthy, intact ecosystems, it was so obvious so much had been lost here. Our native forest cover was down to about 2%. All our large land mammals, from the bear to the moose, the lynx, the wolf, wild boar and beaver, had been exterminated, and many other species dramatically reduced in numbers. And it felt like a big sacrifice to come back and live in this depleted landscape. I first went to Glen Afric in 1979 and was touched by the place because it's one of the best remnants of the Caledonian forest in the Highlands. People say it's got the largest extent of least disturbed forests in the whole country. And it was the closest I could experience to the better forests I'd seen elsewhere. So I began going out there regularly, and I very soon saw that the forest was dying on its feet. It consisted of old trees, 200 to 250 years old, coming to the end of their lives in many cases, dying on their feet. They die from the top down, and they form a snag, a standing dead pine, which can persist for 100 years or more because of the resin content. And as those old trees were dying off, no young trees were going to replace them, because we had far too many deer and sheep in many cases that were eating everything to the ground. Any tree seedlings, other vegetation, heather, herbaceous plants, everything was getting mown down. And we'd got away with that, I saw, for 200 years because the mature trees were in their prime and growing. But now they were all dying of old age and not being replaced. And I realized we were the last generation that could save this forest. So in 1986, the end of a major conference I organized at Findhorn with 250 people called One Earth, a Call to Action. I made a public commitment in front of all the participants to launch a project to restore the forest because I felt it was calling out for help. I could sense that call, and I realized somebody needed to do something about it, and maybe that somebody was me. So that was my entry point into the world of rewilding in 1986. It took me 3 years to raise money, to make contact with landowners, to educate myself, and to find access to sites where I could do work. And practical work started in 1989 and grew significantly in 1990 with a big fence that protected 100,000 naturally occurring pine seedlings that were getting eaten to death by deer. Put the fence up, they could all grow successfully. And that area has been transformed. And Trees for Life grew from that to become a successful charity. In 2008, bought 10,000 acres of land itself in Glenmorris, in the next valley south from Glen Afric. Trained up hundreds of people to lead volunteer weeks and inspired many other people to start their own rewilding projects. And along the way with that, I had this much bigger vision that rewilding needs to become a primary focus for all of humanity, because at the moment, our planet is in this trajectory towards death and disaster. We're clearing forests, we're overfishing the oceans, we're driving species to extinction, we've got climate change and everything else, pollution, microplastics, you name it. And a lot of efforts going into trying to stop that, but that's not enough. Even if all the destruction were remarkably to stop tomorrow, a miracle, we'd still be left with a depleted planet, because what's happened in Scotland over the past few hundred years is now being repeated everywhere. So we need to actually reverse it as well. And that's what rewilding is all about. It's about bringing life back, helping the Earth's natural inherent process of recovery, which we're blocking in most cases. We stop blocking it, it will happen, but we can also judiciously accelerate it. And that's what we were doing in Glen Afric with putting up fences to keep the deer away so that trees could grow again. And once the trees are big enough, the fences can be taken down and the whole ecosystem begins to recover. So my big vision was we need to have the first shared task for all humanity. We've never had that before. It's every nation for itself competing against everybody else. We need a shared task for all humanity. And that surely has to be taking care of the one thing that we have in common, our planet, Mother Earth, Gaia, the living world of which we're one out of only 5 million species, maybe more even. And at the moment, we're destroying the future, not just of all those other species, but of ourselves as well. So rewilding to me is the thing that can draw all peoples, all nations, all cultures together and offer something positive that is the viable alternative to the endless greed that is driving so much of our world today, more. And what I saw is that humanity has become a selfish species. We want to take more and more of the planet for ourselves. And that's what's depriving other species of their place in the world, their habitat, their homes. And I was inspired a few years ago reading a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. I don't know if any of the listeners to this know this book. It's a wonderful book. It starts with a man answering an ad in a newspaper in San Francisco. And the advertisement says, "Teacher seeks pupil. Must have an earnest desire to save the world. Apply in person." It's a fictional story. So the protagonist in the story goes to the address that's provided, and he finds there's nobody there except for a gorilla. And the gorilla is intelligent and can communicate in human language. And the gorilla calls itself Ishmael. Ishmael proceeds to give a gorilla's view of what humans have done to the world. And he divides humans into two categories. The leavers, the hunter-gatherer peoples, there's still a few exist in New Guinea and other places like that, who basically left the world the way they found it, and left very little trace of themselves, low impact. But with the rise of settled agriculture, we became what Ishmael calls the takers. And we began taking and taking and taking. And of course, that's what our modern day 21st century culture has been so good at, taking everything we can from the planet. Now, I know, and probably many of the people listening to this podcast know, there is no future for the takers. We're running out of things to take. Also, because we've got 8 billion people on the planet now, we could not go back to being leavers, even if we wanted to have a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, because the planet could not support 8 billion hunter-gatherers. So there's no future for takers, there's no future for leavers. We have to become something different, in my view. We have to become the givers, where we give back more than we take from the planet. And that's what rewilding is all about. It's about giving back space to our fellow species, to natural habitats, to ecosystems, that they can thrive and continue their evolutionary journey, which is just as important as the evolutionary journey of human beings. So that's my big vision, that rewilding will become this shared task for all of humanity. And I think it's inspiring many people. I've traveled and seen and met people involved in rewilding in various countries around the world. In Costa Rica, where the dry tropical forests are being restored. In India, where the dry tropical evergreen forest is being restored by the community of Auroville in Tamil Nadu state. And rewilding projects around Britain too. It's captured the imagination of many people. But the crucial thing, and I think the central point I want to make in this podcast, is that rewilding can only be successful if we as humans reduce our demands on the planet. We have to free up the land and the space that can be restored, can be returned to healthy balance of ecology with its full complement of species. And one of the primary ways that we can do that, perhaps the most important and most significant, is through changing our diets. Because at the moment, most of humanity lives on a heavily meat-based and animal-based diet. And that takes up a huge percentage of the world's land. Recent figures have shown that if all the world were to convert from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, our need for agricultural land would decrease from 4 billion hectares to 1 billion hectares. We would only need a quarter of the land to grow the food that we need. And that would free up the other 3/4 for rewilding and restoration. That would give a future to orangutans, to lions in Africa, to polar bears, to whales in the sea, and all the other creatures that are at risk at the moment because of the demands of our current lifestyle. So I first became aware of this in 1978. I became vegetarian. And then I went to a talk in London in 1979 given by a woman called Kathleen Janaway, who was the secretary of the Vegan Society in Britain at the time. And she was a very articulate and eloquent speaker. She gave this great talk outlining all these reasons for being vegan. And they were exactly the reasons why I had become vegetarian. So I became vegan as a result of that talk in 1979, and I've been vegan ever since. And I feel very empowered and energized by that. And it goes hand in hand with this work of rewilding here in the Highlands of Scotland.
We'll pause here for a musical interlude, after which we'll return with more from Alan Watson Featherstone. This is another musical soundscape composition by Matthew Gerstenberger. It's entitled Contemporary Music 2. We're back for the second part of Alan Watson Featherstone's discussion about his work, rewilding, and what we need to hope to have a livable planet.
Here in Scotland, we've got a classic case of animal domination of the landscape. Scotland has a population of 5 million people, and we have 6 million sheep in the country. So I say only half jokingly sometimes that Scotland is a nation of sheep because there's more sheep than people. And in fact, we've been rather sheepish as a nation because we've allowed ourselves to be bullied and pushed around by the English for so much of our history. So there used to be 30,000 sheep in Glenafric at the peak of sheep rearing, which happened in the decades and century after the Highland clearances, that followed the Battle of Culloden when the Highlanders were defeated. And many people were forced off the land. They emigrated to Nova Scotia, to New Zealand, Australia, and sheep were brought in large numbers. And they act like this giant fleet of lawnmowers, eating everything down to the ground. Fortunately, in Glenafric today, there are no sheep. They're all gone. But we've still got far too many red deer. They have no native predators anymore. The wolf and the lynx have been gone for hundreds of years, and they have nothing to control them. And people encourage deer numbers to increase because wealthy people want to come and shoot them and have a nice rack of antlers on the wall and venison to serve to their guests in their mansions. So we've got this huge imbalance of far too many herbivores in Scotland, no carnivores, and no regeneration of trees. So Glenafric, we've been fortunate that the sheep have been removed there. We've been able, working with the Forestry Commission, or Forestry and Land Scotland as it's now known, to put up fences and to help a new generation of trees grow. But if we want to see the forest, the Caledonian forest in Scotland and other similar forests in other parts of the world to recover, we need to reduce the number of herbivores. And herbivore impacts are massive in many countries. Scotland, I said, has got more sheep than people. New Zealand is the worst case on the planet. New Zealand has 24 million sheep and 5 million people. So the sheep outnumber people almost 5 to 1 there. And of course, almost all the native forests in New Zealand have been cleared to make sheep pasture. Australia, another case in point. And in Costa Rica and other countries in Central America, they became notorious in the last 20 years or so for the so-called hamburger connection, where the rainforests were burned and cleared to create cattle pasture to provide cheap beef that could be sold to the US and other wealthy countries. So there's a very clear link between animal-based agriculture, meat-based diets, and deforestation. And if we want to reverse that, the best way we can do that is by shifting to a vegan diet, to a plant-based diet, because that reduces the amount of land that I need to grow the food that I depend on to survive. And there's been various, statistical exercises and mapping exercises done that show that in Britain, in particular, 85% of our agricultural land, 85% of our agricultural land is used either for animal pasture or for growing animal feed. And only 15% of the land under agriculture in Britain is used directly for growing crops for people, vegetables or wheat for bread and things like that. Here where I live, one of the main crops is barley in the surrounding area, and that's used either for making Scotch whisky or as animal feed. There's not much in the way of vegetables grown here, although the soils are perfectly suitable. So the whole system we've built up is based on producing things for meat-based diets, partly due to the fact that, because of the food chain building up to different levels, there's an opportunity to make more profit. And that profit motive, of course, is what's driving so much destruction. So Britain not only has 85% of its land, agricultural land, used going to meat production and fodder production, but we also depend on fodder crops and animals from other parts of the world as well. So the ecological footprint of the meat-based diet is not limited to Britain alone. It actually, has an impact in other countries throughout the world. So for me, my life has really been about these two things, about reducing my personal demands on the planet. Becoming vegan was one way of doing that. I have a little vegetable garden myself where I grow my own organic vegetables. I grow bean sprouts in my kitchen every day of the year. I live in an ecologically designed house, which is powered by electricity from our community wind turbines. My wife and I have a small electric car that gets charged by the wind turbines at night. So trying to minimize my impact on the planet as much as possible, and then giving something back through this work of rewilding, of helping to create a future habitat for our other species. And my big vision is that we will have all our native mammals back in Scotland again. We've now got beavers back. We've got wild boar in a few places. The next step is to bring back one of our predators, probably the lynx, because it's not got the same cultural prejudice directed against it that the wolf has. But interestingly enough, again, if we look at both the lynx and wolf, which I feel we need to have back, the main obstacle to those in many cases is people's attitude, they'll prey on our sheep. So again, it's the animal-based agriculture that is a limit to the potential for rewilding. So if we reduce the sheep numbers and, confine them to smaller areas, that will allow us to bring back the predators in areas where the sheep are not there anymore. So there's very many links between shifting to a plant-based diet and the success of rewilding. And I believe the future of our planet depends on those two things. If we continue our present trajectory of the endless taking culture based on heavily meat-oriented diets, we have no future. We're going to destroy everything. But we need to turn things around, and each person can make a contribution to that. Not everybody may have the potential to start a rewilding project like I did. If you live in a big city, that's a challenge. But everybody can make a personal choice by shifting to a plant-based diet, reducing their impact on the planet. And by doing so, will help to free up space somewhere, Britain or elsewhere, where rewilding can happen successfully. So I think that's what I'd like to end on in terms of talking just now, this sense of personal empowerment. I believe each one of us has to choose. Are we part of the ongoing destruction of the planet, or are we doing something to make a positive contribution to a viable future? And everybody has the ability to do that. Shifting to a plant-based diet is possible for every single person. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alan. That was inspiring and but practical too. And I really like how you talked about what's happening in Britain, because that is also one of the things that I focus on, what's happening in Britain and how that then is it's really what's also happening in the rest of the world in terms of our land use, our land misuse, really. The more we focus on animal-based products, the less land we actually have, and the less freedom we even actually have. I want to go back. Ishmael, I loved that book. I read it decades ago, and I really should read it again because it has stuck with me. I think I read it when I was at university, so many years ago now, and it really is stuck with me. And the thing that I always think about too is I read all these things, and I all of the various things that I thought about, and the reading Ishmael and other books, but yet I didn't become vegan. I didn't have any anyone I knew who was vegan, or I might even have known vegans, but they didn't say they were. And so I think it's really important to express ourselves and to let people know we are vegan, and even in the sense that it shows an example for other people to say, oh, well, look, okay, she's doing that, he's doing that, they're doing that. Okay, well, I can do it too, or I can find out more, and so forth, which is also ties in with each of the things that we can do individually, which does eventually lead to a collective, I think. So it's really good to hear your story, that you've been vegan for a very long time, since 1979. And I would have loved to have been at that talk, but I was 9 at the time. So it wouldn't have worked.
Hearing you speak about Ishmael again just reminds me, I can say a little bit more about what I mentioned about needing to become the givers.
Yeah.
Because I think there's 4 key things that we can give back. The first is we need to give back space to our fellow species, and that's what rewilding needs, and it's what shifting to a plant-based diet allows. I mentioned earlier, it would take a quarter of the land to provide food if everybody became vegan. So we need to give space back to our fellow species. We need to give life back to them. At the moment, we're still inflicting death on so many species, either through direct exploitation or through pollution or loss of habitat and so forth. So we need to give life back to them. We need to give freedom back as well, because our mainstream culture is still based on this premise that humans are the most evolved species on the planet, and that we need to manage everything. And that is patently false. I believe every species is equally highly evolved, because we've all come on a journey from the same primordial 100%. Cells billions of years ago. Evolution has taken us on different paths. And the arrogance of humanism is this idea that we need to be in charge and manage everything. 100%. We actually need to step back from that. So that's the third thing. We need to give other species freedom. And the final thing, and in many ways to me the most important, and it comes from my heritage here in the Findhorn community, is that we need to give love. Because at the moment we live in a world which is dominated by fear, hatred, violence, control, and everything. But I think almost everybody on the planet, perhaps everybody, has an experience in their own lives of the power of love. Everybody who's a parent knows that children flourish and become more whole and healthy when they're raised in an atmosphere of love. Everybody who owns a pet, a dog or a cat or whatever, knows that the pets respond to love. In English, we have a saying that people who have a special way with plants, we say they have a green thumb. But actually, I think that's a misnomer. I think it's a green heart, because it's the heart that makes the difference. It's the love they give. The thumb only does the work of the heart. And that, of course, is the whole message of the Findhorn community. People meditated with the plants, got messages and acted on those, and produced these large vegetables in sand through the power of love. And that's what I found through the work of rewilding as well. There are particular trees that I've gone out to very regularly in Glen Africa over many years. I photograph them every year. They get more attention than the others just because I've chosen those. And there's one in particular called the champion pine, and it is the biggest tree there in this fenced area. We've measured them all, and this one that I always go to and I've been photographing since 1992 is the biggest tree. And it's my personal equivalent of a 40-pound cabbage in the Findhorn community, this champion pine. And I think many people have experiences like that without realizing the significance of them. And that's, I believe, the task ahead of us now. We need to learn to liberate the love in each of our hearts to help the healing of the world, the healing of humanity, and to create this future for all other species. And being vegan is one expression of that love.
I completely agree. And in some ways, the givers, as a category. You could even call them coexisters. It's actually just reframing our the way we perceive the world and the way we engage with it. I want to share something that I was just recently in New York, and I happened to go with a friend to see an art exhibit. And the man's name is Jack Whitten, and he died a few years ago, I think 2018. A very long, prolific career, amazing pieces of work. And I don't usually listen to audio guide tours because there's just too much, but I did in this case, and he was really engaging. He was talking a lot of different things, and for one painting, he said about the way he perceives things and the way, different realization. He says this. He said, "When freedom expands, consciousness expands." And I think that resonated with me. I suspect it resonates with you, because if we give ourselves the freedom to be and to explore different ways of being, and to explore and relate to nature, relate to animals in different ways, and relate to one another in different ways, then consciousness, and you can define consciousness in whichever way you want. I think it can be love, it can be questioning everything, questioning the givens, questioning the framework givens that society says these are the things that you must be or you must follow. I think that's really powerful and places the importance in the right place. What do you think?
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And I would say it applies not just to humans, but the thing of freedom and consciousness expansion applies to other species as well. And they have their own evolutionary journey. They have their own potential. And at the moment, all those doors are being closed by human actions. And if we give them the freedom to be themselves again, they will continue their evolutionary journey and embody more of their own state of consciousness. They will pass forward into a higher state of consciousness too. Might be different from humans, but that's what the world is offering the potential for.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's a freedom. It's a freedom for all, which is a very scary thing if you're the status quo, because that's an existential threat. So, But on that note, I want to ask you, where can people follow your work? And do you have any projects, and I know that you do, that you'd like to promote and talk about?
Okay, thanks for that. So if people want to follow my work, I have an account on LinkedIn. Search for Alan Watson Featherstone there. I'm also on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I have my own website, alanwatsonfeatherstone.com. So you can follow me on any of those places. In terms of projects at the moment, there's a number of things I'm working on. I'm working on a book about Glen Afric, about the Caledonian forest there and the work of rewilding. That hopefully will be published sometime next year. My wife and I run workshops, rewilding weeks in Glen Afric with a vegan-based diet. And the next one is scheduled in October, from the 4th to 11th of October. The information will be on my website in the next couple of days. And if anybody is interested, I also published something called the Forests Forever Calendar. It can be ordered through my website, and it's a perpetual calendar good for every year, with a photograph of trees and forests from a different country for every day of the year, together with an inspired quotation. And it's intended as a source of inspiration to share what I've found out about the world's forests and the importance they've had for many people, and hopefully help promote the protection and restoration of those forests as well.
That's fantastic. And I'll be sure to put all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Alan. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, I've enjoyed this. It's been great. As you've seen, as you've heard, I get into a flow and my inspiration just comes out. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
No, thank you. And thanks for everything that you do.
And you too.
This is our second deep dive into rewilding. The first was with Troy Vettese and Drew Pendergrass back in Season 2. For those just joining this conversation, let's get clear about what rewilding really means. The term was coined in the 1980s by Earth First's Dave Foreman, but the concept is timeless. Restoring ecosystems by stepping back and letting nature lead. That might mean reintroducing missing species, allowing forests to regenerate naturally, or converting farmland back to wilderness. The IUCN defines it as returning damaged habitats to their original self-sustaining glory, shifting from human control to coexistence. But why does this matter right now? As Alan so powerfully reminded us, biodiversity isn't optional. It's our life support system, and we are systematically destroying it. Just consider these brutal facts. Agriculture already claims half of the Earth's habitable land. 75% of that farmland is used for animal agriculture. Yet animal agriculture provides just 18% of our calories. If we continue our current meat, dairy, and egg consumption, we'll need to convert 80% of remaining wildlands, forests, grasslands, and shrublands into more animal farms. Let that sink in. As Alan put it simply, that path leads to no future. But here's the radical hope. We don't need to do this. We really, really don't. Transitioning to plant-based agriculture could free up 3/4 of farmland. Imagine that land rewilding, forests regrowing, species returning, ecosystems restoring. Britain shows what's possible. It lost half its woodlands even before Roman times due to animal farming, dwindling to just 5% by the 1800s. Yet today, rewilding projects all over the UK prove recovery is possible. And this isn't just about government policies, though we desperately need those as well. It's about every meal choice each of us makes. Because as long as we keep eating meat, dairy, and eggs at current rates, no politician will ever make the large-scale changes we need. Rewilding offers us a vision, a world where humanity doesn't dominate nature, but thrives with it. That future is still possible, but only if we choose it, starting today.
We tear things up when we go round. We burn things up when we go round. We speed things up when we go round.
That's it from me, Emmy Leese. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with others, and leave us a review. Remember, you can get in touch by email at thinklikeaveganbook@gmail.com if you have questions, comments, or want to suggest a guest or a topic for discussion. I'd be happy to hear from you. And you can find more of my work and upcoming events on my website, emilialeese.com, and on Substack and on social media. And buy a copy of Think Like a Vegan anywhere you buy books and audiobooks, or request it from your library. Production credit goes to Jim Moore of Bloody Vegans Productions. Theme music provided by Jenny Moore's Mystic Business from the eponymous album. The opening tune is Flashbacks, and we close with Tear Things Up. The interval music is by Matthew Gerstenberger.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.